The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning. Welcome to Naviant Solution Spotlight. Today we are talking about how you can become more efficient and manage your human resources processes with the use of OnBase. And let me get here where I can actually click to the next slide. Here's hopefully our only technical difficulty of the morning. My name is Guy Schrader. I am the Manager of Sales Engineering with Naviant, and our presenter today is Tricia Shields. She is Naviant's Manager of Human Resources and Administration. She's going to be covering how Naviant, we actually use the OnBase system to improve efficiencies within our human resources area. And one really quick housekeeping slide here. Keep in mind within a GoToWebinar, we cannot hear you, so you are all muted so that can help us to record this session quite cleanly. So if you do have any questions that come up, please use the GoToMeeting panel. There's a questions area that you see probably towards the bottom over there. Also feel free to use the chat. We will be monitoring that during the webinar and try to address any questions towards the end here. As I mentioned, we are recording this, and you will get an email. Anybody that was registered for this will actually get an email with a link to the actual recording. And please do take a few moments at the conclusion of the webinar, complete the survey. We're always looking for feedback and suggestions for future topics that you might have that you'd like to hear presented by Naviant as it relates to any of the technologies that we represent. So with that, I am going to turn this all over to Tricia for her presentation. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you, Guy, and welcome to everybody that we've got logged in online this morning. As Guy mentioned, my name is Tricia Shields, and I'm Manager of Human Resources and Administration here at Naviant. Just to start by giving a little bit of background, Naviant's about a 60-person company, and we have 2 locations, so here in Wisconsin and also in Ohio. And we do have several employees that work remotely, both from home offices and from customer sites. So just to give an understanding of how our HR department, the demographic that we're working with. So the solution today that we're going to be looking at is going to be built specific to our needs, but hopefully you'll be able to see how it could potentially scale to your company. We do utilize OnBase internally for several of our departments, but today we're going to be specifically looking at how we use it in HR. So today I'll be talking about the considerations that we went through in determining why we wanted to utilize OnBase in HR. I'm going to show you some of the most impactful areas that HR at Naviant uses OnBase, and then we'll allow some time for some questions at the end. So jumping right in, why did we want to go to a more automated solution in HR? For us, we wanted to make sure that a few key components were met. One of those being employee data, that all employee data is secure. So as an example, historically, our personnel records were in locked filing cabinets, and I'm sure you can appreciate, that filing cabinet, someone forgets to lock it up or the lock breaks, and now employee data is going to be completely exposed. We knew with an automated solution, we'd have consistent security and that we'd have more control over it. And then from a regulatory compliance standpoint, we wanted to make distribution and tracking compliance documents easier. All of you HR professionals online know that just keeping up with that, what documents need to be distributed and to who can be a real challenge, let alone keeping track of what version you sent and who you sent it to when you sent it. So we wanted to make sure that that need was addressed. We also wanted to make sure that we were creating a system that was easy to use from both the user perspective, but also easy for us to administer. And then finally, we wanted to eliminate paper. I mean, that's what we do at Naviant. But, just paper-based processes, it can just be so unorganized and just creates a higher likelihood for mistakes. So to overview the high impact areas at Naviant that we're using OnBase, I'm going to give a little teaser here. We are currently working on a recruitment applicant tracking system in OnBase. It's currently in the design and development phase, so we won't be able to show that today, but that will be coming soon. Just in going through the process thus far, I can share that what we're creating is very easy for the candidate to use, which is so important in our current marketplace. So I'm really excited to get that final product into production, and I'd be happy to share that if anyone's interested. What I will cover today is I'll show you our pre-employment document sharing. So that's going to be providing HR and payroll documents before an employee's start date. The whole onboarding process, which is going to be everything from ordering IT equipment to maybe documenting which benefits were offered to an employee. Personnel data storage, so that's going to be our really compliant personnel files. They're really easy to use and they're very safe and secure. Payroll communication, this is how our HR department is communicating with payroll to make sure that we're absolutely not missing anything in what HR did that affects payroll. So thinking about insurance premiums, incentive pay, or things like that. Document review compliance, I'll tout about this much later, but this is the piece that's handling all things compliance. And then performance management or check-ins. At Naviant, we have a quarterly check-in process, and I'll show you how that piece works. And then finally, departures. It's going to be somewhat similar to our onboarding process, just kind of on the flip side. It's going to be tracking the return of IT equipment, ensuring that we're updating benefit carriers and changes and things like that. So to stick within our time here today, I'm going to cover all this at a really high level, but even for what I'm covering, you should be able to get an idea of how the user interaction works and why this system's been just a huge benefit to us. Do feel free to ask questions along the way if you're thinking of those for specific areas, but we'll likely hold off until the end to start answering those. Okay, so let's start with how we share documents with our new hires. When an employee first starts at Naviant, we like to start communicating with them as soon as we have their accepted offer. We actually here have a philosophy, we call it Naviant 365, and it's designed to provide employees with interesting facts or just informative things from the time they sign their offer letter until 365 days later. As part of that process, one of our early communications with them is to send them their payroll and benefit documents in advance of their start date. You know, we've just noticed that some employees like to have more time to look these over and not feel so rushed when they get started. Plus, just new hires are receiving a lot of information that first day. So historically, what this looked like, to be honest, it was probably a bit overwhelming. We printed out a bunch of paperwork, so thinking about, you know, W-4, state withholding, I-9, benefit enrollments, affinity plan information, and then that whole pile of paperwork would just be sitting on their desks, staring at them on their first day. Oftentimes, we need that information back pretty quick based on when a start date might fall comparatively to a payroll date. So we just wanted to make sure that this process was easier for the employee and then certainly easier for us in getting them set up in our systems. So now with OnBase, you'll see we're able to provide payroll and benefit documents in an organized and secure fashion to new hires before they're even set up in any of our internal systems. So this is giving them a chance to look at benefit details. They have an opportunity to ask questions, and they can even start filling out their forms prior to their start date. So what you're looking at on the screen right now is I've got a folder for each of the document types that I want to communicate, and then I've got files stored in those folders specific to the employee that I'm onboarding. I'm providing the employee with a link, and they can go in and access the documents and provide them back to me right through that link as well. I really like this tool. It allows me to customize the folders to what I want in them. So in addition to what I have here, I might add in some general information about Naviant or maybe about our industry specifically. It's also nice as I'm able to lock down the link so I can make it read only. And in general, I do read write on this link just because it's nice when we have remote employees to be able to share documents back with me. I also have the ability to make the link expire after a period of time so that we're not leaving documents out there too long. And I also have the ability to add a password. All right, so at that same time that I'm working on communicating with our new hire, I'm also, or I should say the system is also working on onboarding them internally. As with all organizations, we have, when we have a new hire, there's a lot of steps that need to be completed. And in a lot of cases, I think facilitating that process and just ensuring that everything's running smoothly is up to HR. I think it's more commonplace now to have some soft tasks happening in relation to starting a new hire. So like at Naviant, we're sending them a gift basket before their start date, or decorating their office for their first day, maybe ordering them company merchandise. So it's important for us to be able to not only provide a consistent experience for each of the new hires, but also to make sure that those the more traditional HR tasks are also being addressed. I do know a lot of HR departments, and historically we did as well, are relying heavily on Excel spreadsheets for tracking onboarding tasks and then communicating a lot over email. That's obviously a less reliable way to onboard. As you get busy and you forget to check a spreadsheet, or maybe forget to tell the internal systems person that your new hire needs a laptop. So we wanted to make sure that our systems addressed all parts of onboarding, just to make sure that nothing was potentially missed. With OnBase, we've created an onboarding process that starts when I upload a signed offer letter into the system. One cool feature, and you'll see it on the ribbon shown on the screen, is that there is Outlook integration with OnBase. So in most cases, I'd be getting an offer letter via email, and I can just upload it directly from that Outlook ribbon. The system does take the cue on the offer letter being uploaded to start several different processes. So one is going to be sending out a notification like the one on the screen to individuals that are going to be involved in the new hire onboarding process. A separate notification is sent to the employee's manager, just letting them know that we've got everything we need on the HR side, with a link to our IT request form. So this form that you're seeing now is used to select access levels by the manager and equipment needs for that specific new hire, and then that's being communicated from the manager within the system to our internal systems group. From an HR perspective, I'm working off of this screen, which on the left, it's showing you different workflows that I have access to work within. So in this case, it's showing departures and onboarding. And then on the right, I get this nice checklist of items that we've predefined as needing to be collected from all new hires. So these documents were all part of what I shared in the link to the new hire before they started. As you can see, items in this list, they're either black, red, or blue. So that's corresponding with documents that have been collected, ones that are still missing. And then blue is for documents that are not required. So as an example, an employee provides a required form back through that initial link that I shared, and it's ingested into the system. It'll turn from red to black on this list. So for me, it's a nice way to visually see what I still need from an employee. I don't really keep track of this checklist in the sense that I'm trying to be reminded of what I need to collect, because the system is actually sending me reminders until all the required documents are collected. This way of tracking onboarding processes has been really nice. It's an easy way to make sure we aren't missing anything and to eliminate the need to manually track who's doing what and did the right people get notified. It's also providing notifications to individuals and allowing them access to certain documents, but not to others. So as an example, our managers do have access to the IT request form, but they can't see an employee's I-9. Also keep in mind that the employee's data is staying really secure, as it's always in OnBase. So as an example, I don't have like the employee's health insurance application printed and sitting on my desk waiting for me to do that enrollment. I can just easily access it from the system and view the information I need kind of when I need it, and I'm going to do the enrollment. Okay, so as a continuation of that process, our employee file is automatically being created. So what we're looking at right now is essentially my personnel records filing cabinet. Just to walk through what's on the screen, on the top left, I've covered up employee names, well, except for our owner, because obviously he's an employee. But essentially after each word active is the employee's name. And then I have 4 subfolders underneath that correspond to that folder. I also have departed employees down below. On the bottom left side of the screen are specific files that are stored within that subfolder that relate to that specific employee. And then on the right, I'm seeing the specific document that I have selected from the file. And then I just blew up and rotated to the top of the frame the subfolders that are color-coded from the right, just because it's a bit harder to see on the screen. So hopefully that all makes sense. I think it's commonplace for HR departments to deal with a lot of requests for specific documents from a personnel file. So, think about instances like a manager didn't keep a copy of an employee's performance review from last year, and they need it this year to complete this year's review. In a paper world, you're going to be going to the filing cabinet, find the document, scan it in, maybe make a copy, got to provide it to the manager via email, or maybe walk it over to them. Or I've seen in some scenarios, to avoid those requests, a manager might be keeping certain documents like a performance review and maybe even forgetting to provide a copy to HR. So using our OnBase system, first and foremost, we have secure personnel records that are centrally stored, and for us, that's been a huge relief. We also have the ability to set up security in each of these subfolder types to allow individuals access to the documents they need, but then also to restrict documents that they don't. So just as an example, in the number 4 confidential subfolder, this is where I have all doctor's notes, workers' comp information, just any other medical records, and then managers don't have access to that subfolder. On the flip side, in the number 2 performance and training subfolder, I've stored employee training certificates, any performance documents, and managers do have access to that. I really like this process in OnBase because it takes a lot of the administration off of me just by controlling document security right through the system. It's also been nice for the employees and the managers to have access to the items they need real time and not having to wait until maybe it works in my schedule. Another piece on this one to keep in mind is that each of these documents has a date assigned specifically to that document, so it's a lot easier to maintain a retention policy out of a system like this than from a paper filing system. All right, and just continuing on in that employee life cycle, I've collected a lot of data from the new hire, much of which needs to be updated in their payroll records. So, thinking about benefit enrollments, what their tax withholdings were, compensation information. So what you're seeing currently on the screen is I'm selecting a filtering process that we call HR effective pay. And then on the right side, it's giving me some filter criteria to select to minimize my search. I think a lot of HR departments are separate from payroll processing, and there is a lot of data that affects what shows up on payroll that HR ultimately has control over. Insurance premium if they've enrolled or if there's changes to that, incentive pay, like we give out a spiff to the employee that wins our monthly values player award, just other changes in compensation. So just like in our scenario, HR might have access to update those records in the payroll system, but ensuring that the data is able to be validated by the user who's ultimately responsible for payroll just provides greater confidence. So using OnBase, we're able to make that communication really reliable. So essentially, as I'm uploading new employee-related forms from the system's asking me the question of what payroll date the change will be reflected on. We predefined all of that as part of our implementation to say, for this specific form, it needs to have an effective payroll date, and this one doesn't. So when payroll's processed, when it's payroll processing time, the payroll specialist is able to use this tool, and they can gain access to the matching forms that meet that criteria, and then they can check it against changes in the payroll system. This process for us has been super beneficial. It allows for a single source for reliable communication at any given time. Also, if there is a change that's made in payroll that doesn't have a supporting document, it kind of acts as a trigger to dig in deeper to why that change was made. All right. Okay, this is one of my absolute favorite areas of OnBase. This is our compliance system. So we use this internally for distribution and tracking of all of our policies and procedures, 401k notices, HIPAA, and other healthcare documents, and just any other general legal notices that need to be sent out to any group of employees, and then we need to be able to show proof that it was provided to them. This has been a great replacement to any manual system that you might be using. You know, if you think about tracking an employee handbook acknowledgments, you know, traditionally that was done by having the employee hand signing a document and turning those back into you. Even at this point, if you're scanning those documents back in, there's still that manual process of tracking, you know, what's been sent to who that's been beneficial for us to be able to eliminate. So from the user perspective, when HR uploads a new document or a revision to a current document, they're getting an email, it's the one that you're seeing here, that provides them with a link to view and interact with that specific document. This screen is showing the dashboard of a user within that compliance system. As you can see, I have documents that have been viewed but are overdue, so the system's been all over me to get those acknowledged. Ones that have not been viewed yet, but they aren't overdue. Ones that have been acknowledged, but I have the ability to mark them as a reference document because they're ones that I want to look at more often. And then ones that have been acknowledged. If I click on any of these individual documents, I can view the document itself, and then you can see up in the top left, I'm also presented with my additional options. So this is where I can go in and acknowledge it, reject it, and no one ever does that, or I can move it to the reference section. Okay, from an administrative perspective, this is my dashboard, and this is where I can see all the users and all the documents, current and past. On the top left, you can see I have a couple groups created, one for our 401k participants for documents I just want to send to that group, and then I have one for all employees. On the right, you're viewing the employee list, and then the documents are going to be showing down below. This system has been phenomenal for us, not only for tracking documents and users, but also just the whole document administration in general. I have the ability to mark within this tool to mark documents as required or not. So like if I just wanted to send out something that's more informational, I can also use this system for that. I can set the length of time that an employee has to acknowledge a document, and I can send out notifications to whole groups or to a specific individual if there are documents that need to be acknowledged. Okay, another important task in the employee lifecycle is the performance management system. I know a lot of companies are performing annual reviews, and some have changed up the timing on how often they're doing the reviews. But whatever cadence you're on, as long as you're tracking and collecting that data, it is important to have a way to track the data that's easy to keep in front of the employee, but also have access for the manager. When you have a paper method for this type of tracking, you know, you're potentially keeping multiple copies that they can differ over time, or either the manager's keeping a copy or the employee's keeping a copy. So at Naviant, we use a quarterly check-in process to ensure that at a minimum, we're documenting and tracking a manager's conversation with employees on a quarterly basis. So what you're looking at now, this is the form that we use to track our quarterly check-ins. Essentially what happens, an employee ID is entered at the top of the form, and then the rest of their stored information is auto-populated by the system into the rest of those boxes. We're able to enter goals down below, and then for each of the quarters, there's a different tab, and we're asking some specific questions relating to the employee's current work effort as well as their career development. In addition to the benefits that I mentioned relating to the ease of access for employees and managers, also from an HR perspective, this has been really nice for me because I also have readily access to review these forms. And then another benefit is that the system is providing notifications and reminders, where historically that came from me. That's something that I don't have to keep track of. All right, and then finally, the last stage, employee departures. So as you all know, this can be a really sensitive time in an employee's life cycle, and we want to make sure that we're following all steps just to be sensitive to that. This process works really similar to the onboarding workflow. So it starts when I create this form that we're seeing on the screen now. Again, I'm providing the employee ID, and the system is essentially filling in the other employee data. Just based on the creation and saving of this form, the system's sending out notifications to our internal support team, so internal systems, payroll, leadership team. The form itself is customized specifically based on the actions that Naviant needs to take when we depart an employee. So we have on here anything from completing an exit interview, retrieving an employee security badge, to sending out COBRA letters if that's applicable. I'm also able to easily update this as our processes kind of change over time. So within this form, you can see we're able to document not only what the tasks are, but who completed each item and on what date. And then we save this form in the departed employee's personnel file so that we have a record of that. You'll also see that some items are marked as needing to be completed before the employee leaves and some after, just based on if they're red or black. This helps to prevent me from getting notifications about activities that I can't complete yet. All right, so that actually brings me to the end of the employee life cycle and really the content that I wanted to highlight today. Hopefully you were able to get some ideas on how to maybe automate some of your HR processes. In the additional time that we have here today, looks like I left a few minutes. We'll open that up to any questions. You will see my contact information on here as well. So if you do want to reach out to me individually, please do. I would love to connect to talk about in more specific any of these areas.
All right. Thank you, Tricia. That's a great overview of how Naviant uses OnBase and the wide variety of areas within the human resources area. I do see that there's a number of questions coming in. Please continue asking those questions. We'll circle back around to that just after I cover some of the upcoming events that Naviant has coming up. We do have a couple of OnBase and ECM 101 events coming up in April, both hosted in Madison as well as Waukesha, where some Highland resources are actually coming out to present a lot of the base concepts of how OnBase and enterprise content management work and how you can utilize that both within human resources to automate functions as well as accounts payable, contracts management. So feel free to register for that event upcoming if you are able to attend in either of those locations. And we also have some digital transformation government events coming up in May, both in Madison as well as up in the Minnesota area in Bloomington. And you can see some of the additional details there. So let's run through the questions really quick in the few moments that we have left. There was a question here. Let me see if I can expand this whatsoever.
Okay. Oh, or hide it.
There we go. How is the confidentiality handled between the OnBase system admin and the content in the, of the HR system? I'll actually address that.
Okay.
What you have the ability of doing inside of OnBase is your different system administrators can actually be configured to only have access to specific document types and to be able to administer those document types. So we do want to make sure that you set up your system admins with the appropriate accounts, with the appropriate permissions so that they can only admin those specific functions and hence still restricting what documents that they might be able to see inside the OnBase world. So we want to make sure that we're 100% sensitive to that security as it relates to human resources. Another question that came in, what was your migration timeline to move to this system? What was the order of the implementation?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I think we started, obviously some of this has phased over time. So like our quarterly check-in process, that's one that we just added this last year. Our initial implementation was the onboarding, departures, and the personnel records. I think those were kind of the three main pieces. trying to think, I think it was maybe months that, that implementation took place over. I mean, it obviously helps that we have the technical resources right here. Yeah, so I think that it really started, the whole process really started with wanting to have automated personnel records and knowing that there was such a nice tool in OnBase to solve kind of some of those security issues and being able to distribute out employee records to certain people and then restrict them from others and not having to administer that from an HR perspective. I think that was really the initial driver. But then that also worked into, okay, how do the forms get into the personnel files? A lot of cases that's, during their onboarding process. So we address that. And then of course, being able to wrap up that employee life cycle as well with the departures.
Another question came in. Is there a new hire checklist also like the departure checklist?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say it's not the same as the departure checklist. That certainly could be something. And now that we've added in a lot more of those soft tasks, I've noticed that I do have, separate lists other than those more standard HR, collecting the W-4, completing an I-9 that I am doing outside the system, or at least within our HR team, we're doing outside the system. So that is something that I'll likely add in, is to have a checklist that I can go through and just manually say, okay, on this, or not manually, but through the system, say on this day I completed this specific task.
Two more questions really quickly. One of the questions was they use ADP for payroll. Can OnBase communicate with separate payroll systems? And I don't know if you wanted to take a first stab at that. I have some viewpoint on that.
Yeah, I mean, we use ADP for payroll as well. I'm trying to think, we don't have any piece of that right now. And I mean, I would love to connect specifically with anyone that does have ADP to talk more about what that could look like, because we use the ADP applicant tracking system, and we're going to be moving to OnBase just because some of the restrictions with ADP. And I'm sure Guy will address that. I'm sure there is some ability to integrate those two systems to allow that data to flow more easily.
Yeah. We see OnBase integrating with a variety of different systems, a variety of different payroll systems for that matter. It really depends upon what level of integration that you want between these different systems. So the communication, sharing, employee demographic information, that's something that can be relatively simple depending upon how your payroll system is hosted. So I guess to really answer that question, it is somewhat a case-by-case basis for which flavor of ADP that you're using or what flavor of the different payroll systems that you have. Another question, how soon will we get the link to the webinar as I could use for a Friday meeting? I believe that we'll actually send that out either later today or sometime early on Thursday. So it should be relatively quickly for you there, Dawn. And can the checklist be customized? I think that's all the question. Can the checklist be customized or content? I'm not quite sure exactly what the specific of the question is there, but any of those checklists that you saw within the slide shots that Tricia had, we configured those 100% from top to bottom to say what are the specific steps, what are the data elements that we want to be able to track. I don't know if you have anything to add on.
Yeah, so both on the onboarding side where it was kind of that red, black, blue checklist, and also the form checklist that I have on the departure side, those are all items that I've specifically identified during the implementation process that we need to have on there that I was tracking in a more manual method previous to that. So good question.
And how about one final question, and we'll wrap it up here because I know we're a couple minutes over. Being an HR manager, what is the single best thing about OnBase that has helped you in your job duties?
Yeah, good question. I think for me, that's probably twofold. So certainly the elimination of the whole administration of these processes. So not having to send out reminders and follow up with notifications, not having to have tons of different spreadsheets, that the system is all handling all of that. And then the other piece is just knowing that our data is available when it needs to be available, but it's also very secure. So that's a really nice piece from the HR perspective.
Great. Tricia, thank you again. And thank you everybody for the questions. That's some great interaction at the end. As you can see on the slide that's up right now, here's Tricia's contact information. feel free to reach out and contact her with any questions, or if you'd like to start any dialogue, maybe even about where to get started or any of the specifics. As mentioned before, this is being recorded, so you will get that link again shortly, we hope sometime later today. Otherwise, as the reminder, please, as you complete the webinar here, please complete that survey. Any other ideas that you have for future topics, please share it there and let us both know how we did in this presentation. Always good feedback. With that, thank you, everybody, and I hope that you have a great remainder of the day. And as always, if there's any questions, feel free to reach out to Naviant further to continue dialogue. Have a great day, everybody. Take care.